invited to make shows. And then I started to get invited into kind of larger spaces. And so at that point, my brain was really able to open up, and I was able to really think about, like, what would it be to make your own environment. So working on the street, you're working on the environment. But in these cases, I was sort of making the world entirely. And finding that there was like a very emotional, tactile thing that would get going in that. And then I also found that the longer you developed an installation, the more I could start to get into, ideas. And so, for example, this is an installation that's about there's an epidemic of the murder of women that happens at the border of the US and Mexico. And it's one of those situations that's a fucking nightmare, but people in the United States don't know about it. And I was like, this is something, it's created by the dynamic between the United States and Mexico. So the United States also holds responsibility, but we don't see it. And so this was an instance where the piece was kind of political, and I wanted to create something that people in the United States could also see and feel and understand this kind of history. And then I started to, each time I would create an installation, this time I was thinking a little bit about climate change and floods. You see this kind of flood line that's happening here. With this installation, I was thinking about the Anthropocene extinction, because right now we're in the middle of the Earth's 6th mass extinction, and it's being caused by humans. And I think that art can be one of those things that helps you understand a situation like that. And then I also started to think about my family. So this piece was the beginning of kind of looking at my family history, because my family has a lot of trauma. So both my parents were addicted to heroin when I was born. There's a lot of mental illness in my family, a lot of depression, a lot of suicide. And so I started to try to understand that through looking at the history of my grandmother. And this was a portrait that I made of my grandmother in relation to this feeling. My mom said that they always called her the Ice Queen because she was very remote. And so it was like the first time I started to ask questions about my family. This is an installation that was in Paris at Adeline's gallery. Are you here, Adeline? No? There you are. Hello. You recognize this? So I've been working with Adeline for a fucking long time. Excuse my French. In America when we swear, we say, pardon my French. Yeah, that's what we say. So then I'll just take through a few more. So my mother passed away about 6 years ago, and it was one of those things where I was starting to kind of ask these questions about my family history. And this was an installation that I created where I'd started to create an installation about climate change and about this feeling that we're kind of losing our home, right? The losing of our... And then at the same time as I was thinking about this, my mother passed away. And so it was this moment that I was kind of filled with the feeling that I had lost my original motherland, and so I just kind of brought these two pieces together and continued working. And so this installation I made a lot of work that was about mothering and nurturing. You see the figure here has a scene about kind of the death process. And then also this tree is like related to kind of home and to safety. And so, this process of kind of thinking through ideas and feelings, like in the installation process. And this is an installation that was about when my mother passed away. I had a very kind of strange experience where I felt her die. And I felt kind of light and her voice, and I woke up and I was crying and I knew that she had died. And so I tried to make an installation that was what I had experienced, because I learned that I'm not the only person who's had this experience. It's something called a shared death experience. And so as I learned about it, I thought, okay, I'm gonna try to communicate this through an artwork. And so I made this installation that was kind of translating what I saw and felt. And also the stories from other people who have seen and felt similar things when they have a near-death experience. And then the last one, it's a little complicated, but it's kind of for me, it's one of the pieces that I'm the most proud of. And it's a piece that sort of deals with trauma, And the reason that I'm the most proud of this installation than really anyone I've ever made is I felt as though not only was it very difficult to make, but it was a situation where, you know, like I said, that there was a lot of trauma in my family. Both my parents were addicts, and I didn't used to understand where addiction came from. But slowly I learned that actually most people who are deeply addicted have a history of severe trauma in childhood. And as I learned that, I also learned about kind of disassociation and mental illness, which is the process where when something's too difficult, your mind kind of almost splits in pieces to try to get away from it. And so I started to work through some images from dreams, some images that were coming up for me in fairy tales, and I started combining those images. And then I remembered when I was about 15, I had this kind of vision of myself, and I had a vision. Do you guys know what this is? It's a switchboard. They used to use it like in the olden days, and you'd connect the calls, right? So I had this image of myself as though I was a switchboard, but I had disconnected cause from effect, and I had confused the lines on purpose because I was trying to hide something inside myself. And even at the time, I knew that I was trying to hide that I found actually I had a lot of fear and hatred toward my mother, who I also loved. So it was like unacceptable to fear her and to hate her. And so I had kind of created this confusion in myself. And so what I did with this piece was I started with the image of the switchboard. And I said, okay, I got this switchboard. And then because the switchboard has many channels, I then took each channel and I put, in this channel is a dream, in this channel is a fairy tale, in this channel is a memory, in this channel is some writing from Sigmund Freud, psychology, whatever. So taking all these things that were related, and you know this image of disassociation, it's like your mind splits into many channels. My aunt, for example, has multiple personalities. It's where she doesn't know her own name. She's really split into many pieces. And this was an image that was really scared me my whole life. And so I started with this switchboard of this many channels kind of disassociated. And then I worked backwards, kind of braiding these things together, making a story out of many pieces until the story came back together into one. And what I understood was that because my mom was often suicidal, sometimes had psychotic episodes, drug addicted, that I really feared actually that she would kill me. And that fear was so unacceptable to a child that I totally hid it. And I only rediscovered it through therapy and through art making. And so this piece was this installation where I went back to the image of my grandmother. I started there again to the Ice Queen, and then I split the house open because the house is so much like an image of the psyche. And then I continued to kind of x-ray through until, you know, I made drawings that told me stories as I was drawing them.
So it's not going too far to say that art was really a therapy for you and a kind of savior?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this piece, I really felt as though I changed my own mind in a way. And of course, I was also doing therapy and other things, but it was really together. And the thing that I realized is that when I was, you know, I've actually never had a substance addiction, and I'm the only person in my family who's never had a substance addiction, and I totally believe that the reason for that is because I started painting when I was 10. And so it gave me a way to soothe myself, to calm myself, and to heal myself.
So thank you for this beautiful story. So you also work